This is Michelle Allman, CEO and company cheerleader for Clear Digital Media, here with
Alex Davis now, actually not Allman anymore.
Yes, Alex is now married, and that we will get into in another podcast. And we're also joined today with a good friend of mine, Dr. Cliff Olson. Welcome, Cliff. We are so glad that you joined us this morning. And I'm going to introduce Cliff a little bit, and then we're going to get into today's podcast, and we're going to talk a lot about what's going on right now in the industry. We're going to talk about, the obvious issues we're dealing with now with COVID, how it's impacted the industry now, how it's impacting the industry, our predictions in the future, how it's impacting our behaviors as professionals in the space, and then our consumers. So we're going to dig into that. So Cliff, for most of you who are going to be watching this in the industry, probably know him and are very familiar with his YouTube channel, which is very popular and very cool. Cliff is a board certified audiologist, holds his doctorate degree from University of Illinois-Champaign, Urbana, which is where I grew up, by the way. My dad actually graduated from U of I. He's a member of the Academy of Doctors of Audiology, a fellow of the American Academy of Audiology, and the founder and owner of Applied Hearing Solutions in Phoenix, Arizona. He's also a bit of a badass. So Dr. Cliff is a former Marine and was a sniper and actually joined the Marines, was it 2 months before 9/11?
Yeah, a couple months, yeah. About a month, actually, before 9/11 happened.
So hats off and big kudos. I come from a military family, so my deep appreciation for your service. So that's really awesome. So welcome. And what we're going to talk about, I want to get into it and talking a lot because, Cliff, you're an audiologist. You are seeing patients and you've been impacted as much, if not more than everyone in the industry. So tell me a little bit more about what you've seen, the impact that it's been to your practice, and what you've seen with some of the practices that you're talking to.
Right, absolutely. And Michelle, Alex, thanks for having me on. So, when this whole thing first started, I think that we were starting to get word of it early March in different states. I think it kind of started in the Pacific Northwest. And, I remember having conversations with patients and me telling them, I don't really think it's going to work its way down here. I think this is going to turn into something that was more like SARS or something like that. And before I knew it, it was only a week or two after I was telling this to patients that we literally just completely shut our doors to not letting anybody come inside the building, no patients inside the building. And I want to say that was, around, late March. And, I've talked with a lot of individuals in the industry, both from a private practice perspective that have brick and mortar hearing clinics. I've talked with a number of individuals in the online hearing aid world, with personal sound amplifiers, with, online dispensed hearing devices. And it's a little bit of a different story for everybody. So a lot of the brick and mortar facilities have shut down to some degree. Some completely, even a couple weeks before we closed our doors, had their doors closed. And, it took a while for some guidance from our professional organizations to kind of give recommendation on what we should actually be doing in terms of, seeing patients or not seeing patients. But, I think that the biggest concern, obviously, is that there's individuals with hearing loss that are going untreated or undertreated at this point. And so a lot of clinic owners have tried to figure out ways to still provide services to some degree to these individuals. And, there's a bunch of different levels of how to go about providing that care. But what I would say from an overall industry standpoint, before I get into like the specifics of, clinics and online dispensing models, is that the individuals that I've talked to from a clinic perspective and from the major hearing aid manufacturers is that they've seen a reduction of 80% of,
Wow.
dispensing of devices. So
Yeah.
huge, and that is definitely correlating with my in-clinic, which is a combination of dispensing hearing aids and providing services. So we've seen an 80% reduction in revenue in this time period as well. Really for the last month is how we look at it at this point. From an online dispensing perspective, I've spoken with several different companies in the online dispensing model, and they've seen around a 20% reduction.
Okay.
So, obviously they weren't up to the level of, production that the traditional hearing aid industry was at, but to only see a 20% drop indicates that, yes, they are also being affected. So there is this general perspective with consumers that they're not as interested at treating their hearing loss right now. I think they're a little more focused on the COVID epidemic. But, by and large, they're seeing a reduction, just not as big. And so it really just goes to show when you shut down clinics and you can't have that in-person care, that's going to be significantly more impacted than being able to dispense online.
Agreed. Now, do you think that reflects a little bit about consumer perception and that might be a good sign for the industry?
Well, I don't know what we would consider a good sign for the industry. I mean, I think that there are consumers who are going to want to start maybe shifting their purchasing decisions more online than having an in-clinic exposure from that perspective. I don't know if it's going to have as global of like a magnitude shift of where people are going to pursue their care.
Right.
I think it's going to make people think more about it, but I don't think that the reason that the online companies maintained market share in this time period better than like actual clinics, local clinics, I don't think it's because individuals who were going to go to a clinic decided like, oh, it's not safe, I'm going to shift my decision-making to online. I don't think that's what happened. I think that the individuals who are going to go online are still going to go online. And 20% of them were like, well, maybe now's not the right time to be spending money. A lot of the individuals who do go online, the reason they're online is to save money and have more convenience. And when you have a lot of those individuals, potentially lower income individuals who want to go online, when they don't have a paycheck because they can't go to work, they're not going to be purchasing. I don't care how cheap your device is online, they're not going to be purchasing right now.
Oh, absolutely. So psychologically, we're already faced with consumers hesitating to take action because of price, but because of psychology, So I think when I mean it's a positive sign for the industry, in other words, people didn't flood the internet to buy a hearing device because they couldn't go to their hearing care professional. So the good news is that didn't happen. And I think that the in-person experience is still extremely valuable for so many people. And there is a market for those online. And clearly hearing loss doesn't discriminate on income, right? So, or, any other demo psychographic related statistics. It is what it is. And so it's more about how do we more effectively reach people and helping them understand the importance and breaking through that psychological barrier. But I think the good news is that people didn't flood the internet to buy a device. They just didn't do anything,
Yeah, I would agree. And here's the other thing about that. From an in-clinic perspective, I think this whole pandemic that's going on has really highlighted the desire for consumers to realize how important the in-office care was to a degree. Because we're getting calls like, when can I come in? When can I come in? When can I come in? My hearing aid is not working, or, whatever the case may be. And so, me and a lot of other clinics that I'm aware of, we've tried to establish the curbside care where you drive up, you drop your devices in a bucket, someone on the team in the clinic goes out, picks up those devices, identifies what the problem is, fix it in office, completely gloved up, and taking, sanitation very, very seriously, and then getting those devices back to the patient. But when you're looking at things like, cerumen removal or earwax removal, that's something that you just can't perform if you are completely shut down. And those individuals who need the testing, who need the earwax removal, who need those types of services, you cannot provide that to them at this point at least not safely. And I think that that's starting to clear up. But that also leaves this other chunk of, are there things that we can do that are outside of the necessity of providing this inside of a clinic that can actually be done? And I think that there are things that we can offer to kind of weather the storm right now, but also that will change the landscape of how the provision of even in-office care happens in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that that's really good insight. And I think as we start to see things open up a little bit, we're seeing a little bit of the light at the end of the tunnel. What do you think the impact's going to be in that regard? So, what we've seen, I think, is a couple of things. We see that it's getting into see their hearing care provider. We're seeing the importance of that relationship. The fact that you're getting, when can I see you? When can I see you? That's a good sign. The fact that good news, bad news. Good news is it matters. Having that relationship matters. There's a lot of services that needed to be provided in person, and that makes a difference in the patient experience. Those going online, I think that the bad news is that this hearing care, as it has traditionally been, takes a second seat to other stressors in someone's life, which is ironic because effective communication is such a vital part of anything regardless. If there is something going on, you need to communicate. We see it even in the world of assisted listening devices, where you're talking about good old-fashioned telephony. It becomes almost bulletproof in situations like this because people they resort back to, I've got to connect with somebody. That human connection is so important. But moving forward into the future, as we start to roll open, do you see this pattern, because it's been a good 30 days, and in 30 days habits form, patterns change. Do you see that having impact as things start to open up, and what do you see that being?
Yeah, I do think it's going to change for some clinics. So in my clinic, I don't even know how many remote care sessions. So this ability to have a teleaudiology session where I'm on video with the patient, I'm tapped directly into their hearing devices and making programming changes, checking the data of the hearing aids, seeing how they're doing, kind of triaging the situation to see, do they need to do a drop-off repair or something along those lines. And I think that has kind of opened up my eyes. Now, I've been doing teleaudiology for the past year and a half, just not to the magnitude that I'm doing it right now, because I always saw value in this. Let's have a touch point with the consumer when they don't even have to physically come into the clinic. I think that that's important. And then I happen to have patients who are scattered all over the place. So in my clinic, even prior to COVID, was almost a necessity for me to be able to provide follow-up care to some of my patients who do not live close to my clinic. What I fear is going to happen, though, is that the vast majority of clinics are going to, during this time, try to figure out some way to provide some level of care to their patients, and then they're just going to revert right back to what they did before, even though there is quite obviously a consumer demand or a patient demand to have remote care activities happening. And, it really begs the question, at least in this time period, is what's going to happen with, if we have patients who literally can't make it into the clinic, even past COVID? I mean, are we just going to not be able to provide them with, traditional audiologic care and comprehensive testing? Are we just going to say, hey, go ahead and go with an online hearing aid company. You won't get the same amount of benefit. Maybe you will, but we have no way of dispensing devices to you if you don't follow the model that our states are restricting us to, essentially. So, I think that there is definitely a way for clinics to kind of learn from this and take the positives away from it and move forward with those. I think that clinic owners and audiologists and hearing instrument specialists need to identify ways of potentially providing care outside of what we're comfortable with, and start conforming a little bit more to what consumers and how consumers want to utilize our services. And whether that's, literally doing online dispensing of hearing aids at a local clinic, so consumers in our relative geographical area have access to high quality treatment and to a hearing care provider locally. whether or not we do some kind of hybrid model where maybe you can purchase devices in office, but you're doing a lot of your follow-up care remotely. I think there's somewhere to blend both of those things. I think the biggest restrictor of that isn't necessarily state regulations that come into play, because I think that states are going to start to realize that if we want our residents in our state to have access to care, we have to loosen up some of these regulations to allow local clinics who are licensed providers in our state to be able to offer some of the same services that we're turning a blind eye to when devices are dispensed, nationally online. But the biggest restrictor is that I think that once things kind of go back to normal, I think that private practice owners are going to go right back to what they feel is comfortable. They're not going to offer remote care. They're not going to try to solve this problem of, how do I work my way into the online dispensing of hearing devices? And that's unfortunate.
And I have now three thoughts that came from that. And it sounds almost like a movement. So a couple of things is, the consumer drives everything. The consumer decides how things are sold and the manner that they're sold. Unfortunately, and this is something we've talked about in the past, is that this industry has not listened and oftentimes has missed huge opportunities for growth and expansion of care and getting to more patients earlier in their journey because they haven't listened to what the consumer is looking for. So that kind of ties, Alex, your perspective into this a little bit with younger people. So what I think there's a catalyst that this unfortunate situation is created, and that is one that we have got to start listening to the consumer. And the truth is that they want care, and they want care from somebody they trust, and they want the relationship. But they also need a hybrid approach to both in-office care and an online environment that provides that high quality of care, that best practices, but that offers them the flexibility to be able to access some of that online in that environment. And that's going to bring into, the younger perspective in terms of that is often how you as a generation operate.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that this is opening this door if this industry chooses to take it. And there's going to be some who do. And I think that that's where the catalyst of change is going to happen, is that really understanding that there is no, what used to be doesn't mean what's going to be. And that isn't going to drive positive change in helping people, because at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. This industry is positioned to help people live a better life. That's it, right? So I think, the generation that you sit in is going to be a driving factor in that if the industry chooses to see that as a demographic that they want to pay attention to. Does that make sense, Cliff?
Absolutely. And Alex, speaking to your demographic specifically, the things that I'm talking about in terms of having either a hybrid model of care or, having an all online version of care. Is that something that, you specifically are seeing inside of your demographic?
Oh, yeah. I would say that a majority of my friends or people my age, we are always online for things. I would never schedule a doctor's appointment without being able to do that online. So getting care online would be excellent for my generation because that's what we're moving towards. Everything's online now. People grocery shop online, which I think is crazy. I personally like to go to the grocery store, but a lot of people that are my age or in my demographic, that's what they're doing, is online for everything.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important thing. And the funny thing that you mentioned is that you still actually like to have a local supermarket to go to. And I think that it's not that we're trying to shift everything away from an in-person way of doing things. You can have a supermarket that has its doors open that also allows for delivery of their groceries to someone who is local. It's not like we're buying from a grocery store in New York and having it shipped to Arizona for perishable items, right? We like to have this distribution network built in from a grocery store perspective. And I think it's the same thing from a hearing device perspective. I think that a lot of individuals out there who want to treat their hearing loss view it the same way. They want potentially the convenience of ordering something online or doing some things remotely, but I also think they like that safety net of being able to go to a location if they feel like they want to. And if you take away that ability, it removes consideration of that model for a lot of people. I strongly feel that one of the main reasons that consumers with hearing loss avoid the online model is because they know they can get assistance online, but they know that if they have a problem, they don't have a physical location they can go to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I really see an opportunity that comes from this. And I think that blends, the hybrid approach, could be incredibly powerful, not only for existing patient care, but for future patient care for sure. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I was spending some time yesterday actually looking at the state regulations. It always helps to go back to look at individual state regulations for the provision of maybe online dispensing of devices, or what requirements are there to be able to dispense devices in your particular state. Because as you know, every state is different when it comes to the legalities of doing these things. And in the state of Arizona, I mean, it still requires a fully comprehensive audiologic evaluation. So air conduction, bone conduction, speech testing, most comfortable listening levels, uncomfortable listening levels. All of those things are required. And right now, there is no at-home testing solution that can actually adhere to the requirements that the state of Arizona has.
Right.
So to some degree, if you're going to dispense devices online legally in the state of Arizona, you have to have an actual comprehensive test done in the state of Arizona. It is actually not legal to take like an online screening test and dispense hearing aids based off of that test to an Arizona resident. Now, maybe there's some loopholes around that, but me as an individual who's licensed in the state of Arizona, I can't just send home an air conduction testing kit to someone and dispense hearing aids to them outside of this window of where we're in, quote unquote, a pandemic crisis. And we have had our state actually ease the regulations in terms of telemedicine, right? So, I think that from a state by state perspective, the only way to do this, like I mentioned earlier, legally, is to have a hybrid model where someone can be tested in a clinic, even if it's not your clinic, but you have to have an audiogram within the last 12 months that has all of these requirements by the state, so you can even dispense hearing aids to them.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And again, I think it's about what the consumer wants and what they're looking for. And I think we've seen what that looks like. They want the relationship. They have no problem coming in, and you're seeing that they want to come in. And I think, we're talking to you about a demographic. So primarily seniors are coming into the practices, and to reach a younger audience, being able to speak to them to say, hey, we want a relationship with you and we want this to feel good. And, part of that comes with the stigma of hearing loss, let's face it, right? So, we've talked about this, and I think I've probably said it a million times, and everybody does, is hearing aids are the one thing that nobody on the planet Earth goes, yay, can't wait. I don't want to spend my money on that. Yet it is probably one of the most important pieces of technology you could purchase as a person with hearing loss. So we tend to kick the can down the road and we don't address it. And, this conversation's been had ad nauseum. How do we, get people to reduce that timeline before they say, hey, it's okay. Like this is not the end of the world, because the model of my getting care doesn't feel like I'm old. It doesn't feel bad. I feel good about it. And it's because it meets my demand. It meets the things that make sense to me, but also from it's into the psychology of what keeps us from doing that. Does that make sense? And I wonder if in a hybrid model, it makes it more comfortable for people to take action. There you are. Woo! Good thing we have editing. That's beautiful.
Oh my gosh, right?
That's why we have editors.
So I'm hoping you can then kind of figure out a way to carry on your thought with that.
So where did I end up? What was the last thing you heard?
So, boy, you were talking, I panicked so much when everything went out.
You're like, oh crap.
You were talking about reducing like the how do we get past the stigma side of things, and how do we get people to adopt technology earlier?
Yeah, and it's really about the fact that what this has done is presented an opportunity where we've seen consumer interest in wanting to have the relationship. Now, and that comes with like the little asterisk of, yes, the current demographics, primarily senior. And I think this is my prediction. What I see is that, everyone's a little bit fearful, and we talk about what it's going to look like when things start to open up and people might be afraid to go outside. I think there's going to be a small group of people that are still a little afraid to go outside, but we're human beings. We're tribal. We need to see people. unless you're like psycho introverted or super reclusive, you want to get out there. And when you're kept from doing it, I think people are going to be like, oh my gosh, get me out there. I need to go see people. And I think, I really do believe, and let's see if I'm wrong, that as soon as the ability to get into the office is made available, you're going to have a patient schedule that is so backed up, it's going to be a challenge to just get everybody in and seen. And I think a lot of that's going to be purely out of the, wait a minute, this relationship is actually quite important to me, which is
you'll probably have a pretty significant rebound effect, I think, from this. I think it will bring, anytime that you can't do something because you've been restricted away from being able to do it, that's when you really want to do things, right? I mean, it's how the human brain reacts. I think that we are going to see a large group of individuals who reach out and want to come in and get treatment, who may have otherwise not have acted this early to come out and get treatment. Because here's the thing, for people we always talk about stigma associated with hearing aids. And the thing is that people always view things in a very weird way. And what I mean by that is they look at the hearing aid is the answer to the problem. But the problem that they're really trying to solve is that they want to communicate, right? They want to communicate that's the problem. The problem is that they don't want a hearing aid. The problem is they want to communicate, and maybe they don't like that the hearing aid is the solution to that. But as soon as you can help them understand, like, okay, this thing that you want, it's not that you want hearing aids, it's that you want to communicate with someone effectively. And as soon as you provide that to them, they're like, holy cow, like, I really like being able to communicate with people, And then it becomes the hearing aid is just like an afterthought at a certain point, because it's giving you back the thing that you want to do. I really like just lounging around my house in sweatpants because that's what's comfortable. But I can't just go out every day in sweatpants and live my life. I mean, it doesn't accomplish, it's not a societal norm, And so, hearing aids to a large degree, for some people, they just don't view it as a societal norm. And I think people will be blown away. We hear all these numbers about the percentage of people who do not adopt hearing treatment or who don't get hearing aids when they have a hearing loss. We're at absolutely record numbers of people going out and getting hearing aids. I mean, the adoption of hearing aids has increased quarter after quarter for as long as I can remember. And there's a good chance that if you have hearing loss and you know someone else who has hearing loss, that they have treated their hearing loss. I mean, it's getting to that point where it's such a normal thing that we'll look back, kind of like we look back with eyeglasses, where eyeglasses were viewed as this thing that, oh my gosh, I don't want to be called four eyes, or, I don't like the way that it looks. And it has become a complete thing now where you can go online, like to Warby Parker, of course, and you can order a bunch of different styles and determine which one you like best. And then you have people who don't even have a vision loss
that are faking it.
They're faking it for fashion. And I think, and especially with these hearing aids that are coming out that have all of these other abilities other than just treating hearing loss, that is going to be the norm, to where you want to be digitally connected. And Alex, again, I mean, this speaks directly to your generation. Maybe not the greatest generation, or the maybe even the baby boomers. And I think you could make an argument that the baby boomers even want this. But the younger generation, like yourself, you want to be included. Like, you want tech to be a part of your life. Am I correct?
Oh yeah. When I think as technology advances, the stigma is going to go away. I think my theory is it's going to become cool to have one. Because like when we were at the Starkey conference, for example, the technology they were talking about, I was like, wow, this is the potential for hearing aids. Like, that's crazy. And that's just going to expand. That's just going to get better and better over time.
Yeah, I mean, you look at these hearables on the market, and hearables are trying to tap into that side of it. But hearing aids, they have so far of a head start on anybody else that if they really took a hard look, kind of like Starkey is doing, and trying to incorporate different things to really make these devices not just a hearing aid, but a wearable, it is eventually going to cross that chasm to where it becomes a consumer electronic as well, instead of just a hearing aid.
Yep. And that speaks to something about the industry that's going to be interesting, because I've talked about this too before, where there is sort of there's two sides of it. There's the medical side, and then there's a consumer electronic side. And it's the balancing of what it feels like to have medical treatment, medical care, and what it feels like to buy something really cool that's a consumer electronic. And it's two different psychologies and two different approaches to how a consumer sees something, if that makes sense. So when you talk about like, I want to communicate, absolutely. And I think if the industry focused more on the I want to communicate, not I need a hearing aid, it would speak volumes. But there's a way, and I think there's a way to reach both camps. There's people who want to get the cool new thing. And the cool new thing, honestly, and it's not to be, I'm brand agnostic, but sitting in that conference, I was like, wow, this is the first time that I've been in this industry forever. I've actually looked at something and said, I would actually get that.
Mm-hmm.
I would buy that thing. Not because I feel like I have a hearing loss, but that's really cool. There's some cool features in that.
Well, for sure. I mean, the tech is there and the distribution is there.
Yeah.
The problem is that we are completely backwards when we talk about how we communicate this information to consumers. We have turned it into a sales process inside the industry when it should really be an information process. And then the digital way, I mean, if you are still marketing in newspapers, given that there are some markets that it still does make sense for, smaller communities, whatever. Right. But if you're not marketing digitally, if you're not informing consumers digitally, you are going to be irrelevant. Arguably, if you're not already irrelevant, you are going to be irrelevant very soon.
I have a question about that, which kind of segues off of COVID and the issues with this, but speaking to moving into the next stage of the industry, where we've really now have a different understanding of what consumers expect, the marketing. There's still, some professionals out there that I know that are spending up to $800,000 a month in direct mail. And they claim to be killing it, to be just destroying it in the sales of their hearing aids. Ed, do you see that kind of just like, oh, that fell off the cliff? Like it's going to go from you are right now, but, be aware that in 6 months, it could just disappear. There's no way that's sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it is sustainable if there's not something that comes in and significantly disrupts the market. But anyone who is comfortable with whatever they're doing is suspect to change. And you might be killing it right now, but you are killing it. It's a numbers game, right? I mean, you spend X amount of dollars in marketing. If your return on investment is X amount, then it makes financial sense for you.
Right.
Once that starts to invert and no longer are you getting the return on investment, you have no other option at that point. And if you haven't been building up a digital foundation that literally exists forever. So one of the things is that I create a lot of video content and it has a marketing effect, but I do it because I want consumers to be informed. Right. But if I stopped making videos tomorrow, I would have hundreds of informational videos for consumers that they would still continue to see. And there would still be a certain percentage of individuals who are like, I'm not comfortable going to someone else who isn't following best practices. I want to go to this guy. So that is always going to be there. And so, I think it's a very dangerous game to play. If you are like doing that much direct mail, all it takes is a little shift in how much direct mail charges you. Yeah. All it takes is a little shift of how consumers are going to be digesting information and what medium they're actually digesting that information on. And so, more power to them. They're making money right now, but you know what? Short-term thinking is going to make you vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And I like what you said, the digital communication now lasts forever. When you built your digital platform, you have tools to tap back into for forever, literally. So that's a really valid point. So last thing I really want to talk about is where you think, now that we're, again, going back to where we're opening up, like kind of wrap up what you think the next thing that's going to happen, your predictions on how people are going to respond. You did indicate that a lot of people might fall back into bad habits, but what, if you were to give advice, like what do you think the next best steps for people who aren't thinking forward a little bit more like you do should be as they do start to open up?
I think that if you haven't taken this time that we're in right now to rethink how you communicate with an individual with hearing loss, that you've wasted your time to a degree. And I'm not talking like if you had to take care and teach your kids at home, I get that,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
But you still have to take a little bit of this extra time that's been afforded to us and think of how are we going to educate the consumer? And I'm not talking about marketing to the consumer. That's an important distinction here.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that consumers are making informed decisions. And if that decision that they're making for themselves is to come into a private practice audiology clinic, then great. If they determine that the best option for them is to go online, then great. So the question becomes then is, are we going to make enough digital content that is for the purpose of, branding yourself, branding audiology, branding, hearing aid dispensing models, or are you going to try to develop digital content that is designed to sell something?
Yeah.
And if you're going to design digital content to try to sell to a consumer, you are still suspect, just like the newspaper ad, running, companies,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so then it also begs the question then is like, okay, well, if some people are making this informed decision that they want to purchase a device online through an online dispensing model or through a hybrid online clinic dispensing model, we have to start developing an online clinic dispensing model, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have to figure out a way to serve that group of individuals, because I think that, I don't think that hearing aid adoption rates are low because people think there's a stigma associated with hearing aids. I don't think that the adoption rate is low because of high cost of hearing aids, because as well as I do that you can get a hold of these non-for-profit companies and you can get hearing aids for relatively nothing.
Yeah.
So that's not a barrier. It's the information about that that's the barrier.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of consumers, they would treat their hearing loss if they had the model of delivery that they're looking for and that they're comfortable with. And if that means that a clinic like mine has to have a web store that consumers can literally watch video content about a certain brand of product, they like that hearing aid, they order it from my system, they submit a hearing test for me to do an initial fit of that device and ship it to them, and do a virtual consultation with them, a virtual fitting with them, with the stipulation, at least in the state of Arizona, that within a 45 to 60 day time period that they come in to have real ear verification done, because on-ear verification is a requirement in my state. If that's what makes someone more comfortable with, being able to pursue hearing treatment, then great, but we have to start thinking about ways to stop just continuing to follow the rut that we're in of requiring everyone to come in for our very standard, you get a hearing test, you do a hearing aid evaluation, you say, this is the product that's right for you, it costs X amount of dollars, this is the follow-up time frame of you coming into our clinic, I don't care where you live. That's going to have to come into question at some point. And so if clinics really want to come out of this on the other end and be progressively thinking about how we're going to take care of patients now and into the future, we have to start shifting the way that we think about the way that we're practicing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That is really well said. And I think that now's the time. This unfortunate event, I think, has created a catalyst for thought and for change. And I think that, in practice owners like you and hearing care professionals like you are going to see that the benefit of that thought process. So that's really awesome. So hats off, my friends. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really appreciate you taking time, and we'll have to do this again for sure.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on, and this was a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing it again.
All right. Thanks, Cliff. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.